Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we have Max Stoiber. Max, thank you so much for hanging out. How you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I am doing fantastic. It is Christmas season. I get to wear my ugly Christmas sweaters.
The-
I have my rubber ducky here. I feel 100%
oh,
prepared
look at
for this.
the Ducky twins.
Of course.
Oh,
Of
I
course.
didn't know you had gotten one of those. That makes me so
Of
happy.
course. I had to. I had to. It's not like I had much of a choice. They're awesome. They're so good.
uh,
It's on my desk all the time.
I'm dropping a link right now, chat. You too can have your own Party Corgi rubber duck. That is delightful. I just realized I didn't turn on my lights back here. What am I thinking? How can you get into a coding stream without spooky lights in the back?
Oh man, such good lights.
All right, everyone. So, I feel like I've been following your work forever. You've worked on a ton of projects that probably most of us have heard of, but just in case, for folks who haven't heard of you, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself and what you've worked on?
Of course. Thank you for that nice intro. I don't know if that's true, but I've certainly done a lot of stuff. Just yesterday actually was a big moment for me because open source projects that I've created or co-created surpassed a grand total of 100,000 stars on GitHub,
Wow.
which
Congratulations.
is absolutely mind-blowing to me. I remember way back in 2014, 15, when I started with open source, my first 500 stars felt like an insane achievement. And I can't believe that I'm at the point now where we're talking about hundreds of thousands. Like it's a mind-blowing amount. I'm really humbled by the fact that I got to build things and invent things that so many people enjoy using.
Mm-hmm.
And also a lot of people hate using. So it's all upsides and downsides. You know what I mean? Like it's not just all good, but a lot of people enjoy using my stuff, and that makes me very happy and very grateful to be doing what I was doing. So sorry, that was a long, rambly non-answer. What I've done is I've worked a lot in the React space. So if you're in the React space, you might have seen React Boilerplate back in the day. You might have seen styled components. You might have seen Keystone. I've worked on a bunch of open source projects. Most recently, I worked at Gatsby before co-founding GraphCDN. I've done a bunch of stuff, and that's why I'm here. And I'm also equally a huge fan of you, Jason. I'm like I said, really, really excited to be here and to finally be a part of the Learn with Jason show. Very, very pumped to be here.
I'm very happy to have you here. Oh, Ben, thank you for the sub. We're at a 16-month streak. That is wonderful. And yeah, I mean the subs mean a lot, y'all. I mean we're going to talk a little bit about the sponsors later, but the subs also go directly to supporting the show and allowing things like live captioning and bigger and better ridiculous things to happen on the show. So that's very much appreciated. So Max, we talked about your background, but I'm actually really excited about what you're working on now. And before we get into the details of exactly what you're working on, let's set a little bit of context, which is GraphQL it kind of splashed onto the scene. It got a lot of press. Everybody was really, really excited about it. And I think we saw the awareness of GraphQL maybe grew a little bit faster than the actual adoption of GraphQL. Thank you for the sub. I like the
Of
sub
course.
from the yeah. That might be the first time that a guest has ever subscribed to the show live.
I got reminded when Ben subbed. I was like, hold on, I got a sub. Why am I not sub?
Well, now you have
Quickly
access
popped
to
on
that
Twitch
boop
chat.
emoji. You can bury yourself in boops if you want.
Finally, finally.
But okay, so I feel like GraphQL has been one of those things that a lot of people are aware of. Many people have wanted to use it, have maybe tried it, but aren't using it in production. What do you think is what is your take on like how ubiquitous or not GraphQL is?
That's a great question. I think GraphQL has certainly gotten a lot of steam and gained a lot of steam over the last years. It's grown a lot, and I think what ultimately I think is the same thing also with my open source projects. When people like using something, it grows, right? Because they just keep using it, and they keep recommending it to their friends, and they keep talking about it, and they keep sharing it. They keep wanting everybody else to use it. And I think that is definitely happening with GraphQL. The people that are using GraphQL, they're huge fans and they're talking about it. And that is just a really positive sign. I think in terms of general adoption, lots of big companies use it, but it's still a minor percentage of REST, right? I think the vast majority of existing APIs in the world are GraphQL based, are REST based, and only a minority are GraphQL based. And I think that's going to change, right? I think over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years, just like GraphQL has been growing for the past 5, it's going to keep growing, right? And more APIs are going to be GraphQL based, which is a really exciting time. Wait, does that mean I can't be buried in boobs?
We're gonna
I'm just
have
not
to,
reading the chat. Like,
I
what is
know,
that?
I know. I'm having issues.
What am I even here for? I am leaving. I am leaving.
I don't know what happened today, but we appear to have a bug in the chat, so it's not it's like working to a point. I'm not 100% sure what happened, so I'm gonna have to debug that later. We'll see if it's just this view or if it's all of them when we switch over to pair programming. But yeah, so I would agree with your take that GraphQL is still kind of in the minority. It's you're seeing it in the cases where it is just purely obvious, like you need a GraphQL API. A great example of this is GitHub, Shopify. Like these are huge data sets where building out REST endpoints where you could actually access all the data that you need for unique views is a nightmare. You know, you get into GitHub, you say, okay, well, I want the repo. And if the repo gave you an issues array with just IDs, and then you had to go send off another request for each of those IDs to load the issues for the repo. But then inside the issues, you also had to go load, individual requests for the IDs of the authors so that you could show their profile pictures. Suddenly you're making like hundreds or thousands of requests for a single view, and that's just not tenable, right? But GitHub does a GraphQL API, and suddenly you can dig into all that nested data in a single query, and suddenly it's much more approachable and manageable. Shopify, similarly, you've got products, you've got variants, you've got purchases, you've got receipts, you've got customers. All that data is connected, but not necessarily in a way that makes sense for a fully normalized REST API. You need that kind of bespoke, like, let me just get whatever data I need for the view I'm creating. It does feel like in a lot of cases, that complexity is maybe, because let me add some context. The trade-offs of building like a REST versus a GraphQL API, like for a REST API, if I can set up a route and then I can spit out some JSON from that route, I'm kind of done building my REST API in the strictest sense of the word. And GraphQL, it feels like, is a little bit more of a lift to get started. So where do you think the line will be drawn on what should be GraphQL versus what should be REST? Are you suspecting that it'll be all GraphQL all the time, or do you think that it's going to be a balance?
That's a great question that I honestly don't have the answer to. I think, to me, as soon as I start working with other people and other people have to use the thing that I created, GraphQL starts making immediate sense because they can look at exactly what I've done. They can look at exactly the kind of data and the shape of the data that they've gotten, and they don't have to talk to me. They don't have to just send a request and hope that I always send back the same thing. Mm-hmm. They know I will, right? Because it is GraphQL and because it is specified. And to me, that's just like, I've worked with REST APIs, both as a front-end developer, but also I've implemented a few of them. And I would always grab GraphQL now, even though there's like a slight startup cost maybe that is also getting lower over time as people are building tooling in the community. It works so much better as soon as you are in a team, and almost anything I've ever done has been in a team, right? And so to me, that's the point where it's like, I could just return some JSON here, but really, do I want someone to have to look at this code to figure out what data I'm going to return? Nah, man, like just make it a GraphQL API. You know what I mean? And I'm sure there's use cases where you have data that just doesn't make sense for GraphQL, right? I haven't come across any personally, but I'm sure they exist, right? I'm sure there's use cases where you're like, I have no relations. I only need a list of data of things. Like, why do I need GraphQL for this? That doesn't make any sense, right? I always want the same data. Just give me that goddamn data. I don't need that extra level of abstraction. And that's fine, right? Like that's cool. I'm sure those use cases exist, but the ones that I've had, GraphQL has been incredibly valuable for.
Yeah, and like I'll give you a use case that I have where I built both a GraphQL and a REST API, and I found myself mostly using the REST API is because I like list my episodes, and my episodes don't really have a lot of relational data. You know, it's basically a list. And most of the time I'm like, I just want to use a quick fetch request, and I don't want to have to remember how to, like, I know how to send a GraphQL query with just a fetch request, but I can't always remember how to do it. But with a REST API, it's like, I just throw that URL into the fetch and I'm done. And so I think you're right, though, that as data becomes more complex, and I think the point of complexity that it needs to reach is pretty small. The trade-off of setting up GraphQL, especially as the tooling is improving. I think when you look at, something like, say, Hasura, and how quickly Hasura just gives you a GraphQL thing, or like these tools that you can get, open source tooling that'll will auto generate your full GraphQL API with TypeScript autocomplete for the SDK that will give you, and like all this. There's just so many incredible tools out there that are making this way less intimidating. And then the other thing that I've seen people talking about, and watch how quickly and smoothly I do this transition, Max. This is going to be masterful. So the other thing that I see people complain about with GraphQL is that when you're looking at REST is easy to cache. It is easy to reason about. You get HTTP status codes that correspond with what happened from the request. And that with GraphQL, you can't do that as easily, because GraphQL you always send as a post. GraphQL will always send you back a 200, and you have to then parse the response, which means that caching isn't as easy because you can't do URL-based caching anymore. And I have a feeling you've got some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm just going to answer the question from chat. And Mühlemann, that is indeed a ninja riding a reindeer. I don't know if you can see that. Hold on, let me move to the other side. That is a ninja riding a reindeer, which is, of course, the most Christmassy thing you could wear, right? Like, what else would you be wearing for Christmas? I mean, come on, you gotta be wearing that. What's interesting, before I answer your specific question, what's interesting, I think, always is tools tend to break down at transition periods. What I mean by that is, for example, say we make it really easy to build a GraphQL API from scratch, right? Like you're using Hasura, you're using Stepson, you're using one of these tools that gives you an auto-generated GraphQL API. That works great to get started, but then maybe as you build a team and as you start scaling, it becomes a little bit more difficult, right? And maybe you run into some problems and you have to work around some of the limitations in the system. Corollarily, on the other end of the spectrum, like if you're GitHub, you've built so much tooling around your GraphQL API that hundreds of engineers can work on it day in, day out, and it doesn't break, and it works, and the schema is consistent, and there's a bunch of tooling there to make that work at that scale. You could take that same setup and you could use it for your Learn with JSON website, and it would be really tedious to work with, right? Like that makes no sense. And I think often when people talk about trade-offs in engineering, because everything ultimately is a trade-off, they often don't realize that they're talking about different contexts, right? And I think GraphQL is great for some contexts and it's not great for other contexts. And you can't just say, oh yeah, GraphQL is great for everything. But then someone else comes and says, no, I have this one context where it doesn't work, right? So GraphQL is shit. And somebody else goes, no, but I have this other context and GraphQL is great, right? Like that's an unnecessary discussion. You're living in two separate worlds where you're like, this person has a use case where it works, this person has a use case where it doesn't. That's fine, right? Like the trade-offs just don't fit. And I don't know. I think that makes sense. I just gotta go back to chat for a second before I go back into serious mode. The classic story of the samurai on Rudolph, of course. Don't you know? It's not Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. It's Rudolph the red-nosed samurai riding on a reindeer. That is what we're looking at here.
The reason they needed reindeer and why they needed Rudolph specifically wasn't because of fog. It was actually because of a smoke bomb.
Correct. Of course. When the ninja throws a smoke bomb, how are you going to know detail where everything is?
But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and I think that one of the challenges that we have is that tooling, like front end tooling and database tooling, and all these spaces are they're growing rapidly, they change quickly, and that leads to what I would consider to be a little bit of extremism. We look at tools and we want to believe that any given tool is going to solve all of our problems. And we've also got a problem where there's an incentive for companies to tell you that their tool will solve every problem. And so you get a little bit of like, you know, if you depending on which DevRels you follow on Twitter, and I'm guilty of this, you'll see them say, "Oh yeah, you can build anything you want, no matter what. This is the best place for it." And it leads to that kind of, well, okay, well then that means the other DevRel has to say, no, your platform is garbage. Only my platform works for everything. And I'm happy to see that, at least in certain parts of the industry, we're seeing more of a leveling out, where what we're really looking at is, you know, for me at least, the sign of wisdom and maturity in a developer is an unwillingness to say that anything is a perfect solution. You know, I made this joke a couple times, but Sunil Pai said, you know, silver bullets only work on werewolf-shaped problems, and most of our problems aren't in fact werewolf-shaped. So you have to look at everything in terms of like, what's the pragmatic approach to this? We have a problem to solve. Every tool is good at solving some problems better than others. So you have to evaluate everything in the context of the problem that you're trying to solve, and not on the raw merits of a tool. And those trade-offs, some of them are universal trade-offs. Like writing everything in JavaScript has a universal trade-off of it's in the browser and people can turn off JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
So that is a universal trade-off and something that you can discuss kind of broadly, but like, should we build a single page app versus a server rendered app? It really depends on what you're building. So in that, you know, knowing that that's the case, when we talk about GraphQL, let's assume we found a use case. We know that it's the right use case for GraphQL. We've decided to go all in on it. But then we start to run into some of the trade-offs. Like we do have that problem where we only get a 200 HTTP response, whether it passes or fails. And I can't use the URL to cache on. And, you know, I also have this problem. Well, what if I get really aggressive about my caching, but then I've got my list of things, but then somebody creates a new thing. How do I know to invalidate that cache? I can build all this stuff manually. And, you know, back when I was at IBM rolling out GraphQL in 2015, I did write all this stuff myself, and it was horrible, right? It was one of the biggest pain points of adopting GraphQL was trying to figure out, you know, I'm in there as a front end dev trying to build Redis caches and stuff. It was not my happiest moment as a dev. So where does I feel like this is the space that you're very invested in solving. How are you approaching it? Like what are you doing at GraphCDN to make this more manageable?
You know, I will say one more thing about the whole trade-off thing.
Sure.
There's one classic answer in software engineering that always applies, and it depends. It always depends. That is the only thing that is universally true. It always depends. And actually, let me tell you the story of why I co-founded GraphCDN, and then maybe that leads me into some of the trade-offs that we make and where even it is useful. And then maybe that, because, you know, I'm a founder, so I can actually talk about the negative aspects of my business. You know, employees are sometimes a little bit scared, I think. I know when I was an employee, saying bad things about the things that I know everyone worked on is a little bit scary, but I don't have to have that fear anymore. So I'm happy to talk about the limitations and where it doesn't make sense. But I think where GraphCDN came from is that I was working on a product called Spectrum, which was this community platform, and really a lot of open source people mainly were using it. And we were trying to take Discord and make it a little bit more structured, and then just make it public in like the internet. And what that was trying to do is, when people were having interesting conversations in a community, then other people could find them, right? If you were having a conversation about style components or about GraphQL, and you were figuring out a problem and you talk with someone else about it and you figured it out, that content, all that knowledge was suddenly discoverable on Google. And because it was suddenly discoverable on Google, other people that had the same problem could Google and find your solution. And of course, for us also, that meant that we had a growth loop, right? We had a way to get more people into the product, which was actually, it grew a lot more quickly than we originally expected. And we went from almost no one using us to hundreds of thousands of people using us every month very, very, very quickly. But that came with scaling problems, right? We were essentially two designers and me, and I'm like a JavaScript engineer with mostly a front-end background. And so I was suddenly tasked with, my job changed, right? From try to build something that people want that could maybe help the world to, you have to run infrastructure at scale, right? And I'd chosen a really annoyingly bad database called RethinkDB that just didn't scale very well. And so we had tons of downtime and it was absolutely terrible. And I realized, we have this use case where we have all of this data and it's the same for everyone. Everyone that looks at our website sees the same post, sees the same thread, sees the same comments, right? It's all the same data. It's all public anyway. It's the same for everyone. And so really, I could just put a cache in front of that and I would probably get a 95% cache hit rate, right? And I could reduce the load on our stupid database by 10, 50, 100x. It just didn't exist, right? We were using GraphQL and I just could not cache the GraphQL API out of the box. So I did the exact same thing that you were just talking about. I went and I made like this Redis cache thing that never really worked very well. It barely reduced the load. It broke itself all the time. Like it was just a terrible, terrible solution. And that's really where GraphCDN came from. I was like, okay, other people must have this problem, right? Like we are not the only ones that have that use case. And this is also where the trade-offs come in. We had a perfect use case for caching, right? Most of our data, not all of it, but most of our data was public and most of the data was the same for every person looking at it. So that is an ideal use case for caching, right? If a user comes and visits a post, why do I need to go to the database to load that data? It hasn't changed in 3 years. Why am I going to the database to load this post data again? That doesn't make any sense. And that's sort of the corner of the way I think about caching is it's like an axis. It's like a 2-axis graph, right? On the one axis you have, is your data public or is it private? And on the other axis you have, is your data, are you read only or read heavy or are you write heavy, right? Because so we had a use case that was public and read heavy. The data was the same for everyone and it was mostly read. Ideal use case for caching. Absolutely. The other extreme would be something like, for example, an error tracking service, right? That is write heavy and super private data, right? Error tracking services ingest hundreds of thousands of events, aggregate them, process them into a thing, and then a developer hopefully looks at that thing once and then it never happens again. Right. So your cache hit rate would be 0% because you would never go look at the same data twice, hopefully, right? And so that's like the opposite end of the spectrum. That's like you would not cache that. There's no point in adding caching to that stack at all. You will have much bigger problems on the ingestion side. And then there's like use cases in the other two, like sort of middle spectrums, right? And then you have things like, I don't know, for example, a stock market app, right? That is public data. It's the same data for everyone, but it changes every second or so, right? Like maybe even more often. So even if you could cache that, it's like, well, but would the cache rate be very high, right? Like if I'm looking at a stock, it's going to be out of date in a second, right? Like even though everybody looks at the same thing, not so clear anymore. And so it really depends on the use case you have. And that's the way I think about it, right? Is do you have a read heavy or a write heavy use case? And do you have public data or private data? And the honest truth is most use cases fall somewhere in the middle. And they are very, very varied, right? So if you think, for example, about an e-commerce store, which is one of our most common use cases for GraphCDN specifically, some data there is public and read heavy, right? If you think about products, that is super public and super read heavy, and our customers get 98% cache hit rates on that. Fantastic for reducing load. But then your shopping cart is private and write heavy, right? People add 15 things to the shopping cart before looking at it once and then hopefully checking out. Why would you cache? Right? There's no point in caching that. And so use cases usually fall somewhere in the middle. That was a very long and rambly answer. I hope that kind of made sense.
No, I think it does. And you know, it's interesting too, because you're talking about this in the context of GraphQL, but you know, this is also like, you can expand this out a little bit to just the web in general. And you know, one of the core principles that I talk about a lot is like, hey, if you have data that doesn't change often, why not pre-render the page so you don't have to think about caching databases at all, right? Yep. And in some cases, that absolutely makes sense. An API makes a little bit less sense. Like you're not going to try to cache an API permanently as static files. That doesn't make sense. But you can, if you've got a, like, you know, on the Learn with Jason site, I cache all of the episode listings by pre-rendering them instead of trying to load the data on the client side and cache it and then, you know, make sure that people are getting a primed cache instead of hitting the origin. There's just no origin. It's just the data is pre-compiled there. But as you get into things that are more private, when somebody logs into a dashboard, of course you don't pre-render that. That doesn't make any sense. It's one person's data. You absolutely don't want someone else to see somebody's cache data. Like, there's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't cache that. And that's when you move into different forms of rendering. And so, yeah, I think this makes sense, and it feels more universal than just GraphQL as well. This is sort of a, that's that pragmatic mindset toward, choose the tools that make sense when we're dealing with large public data sets, caching, pre-rendering, whatever you want to do to reduce the load on your origin. Great idea. Private data sets, maybe not. Very, very high frequency change data sets, maybe not. But so this is really fascinating. And you mentioned the e-commerce is a common use case. Do you find that, like, when you're setting up GraphCDN on one of these things, are people just only using GraphCDN for a portion, or have you kind of set it up to handle, like, oh well, we won't actually cache this, we won't cache your cart, so you're kind of passing through when it makes sense, and you're letting people make those decisions in your platform versus having to partially onboard?
Exactly. So we give people really fine-grained control. We have a concept we call cache rules, which is similar to Cloudflare's page rules, if you've used those before. Essentially, they let you say, if the query that we're looking at right now that is going through the gateway contains the type product, then cache it for 10 minutes. If the query that comes through the gateway right now contains the type user or shopping cart, then don't cache it, or cache it specifically to that user, right? And so you have very fine-grained control, and you can say, look, I'm passing all my traffic through, but I'm only really interested in caching these specific queries or these specific types or these specific fields, right? And you can have this very fine-grained control where you can say, okay, for this use case, makes total sense. This use case, private data, we're going to cache it per user, but not really worried about it. For this use case, it makes no sense at all. We're not going to cache it all, just pass it through. And I think the interesting thing about GraphCDN is that we do more than just caching, right? We also provide people with analytics, and we provide them with performance monitoring and error tracking. And so people still pass all of their traffic through us because they want to see those features, even when they're not using the caching for everything, right?
Yeah.
Even when they're only using it for a portion. But we absolutely give people that control because they need it, right? Almost no API is just public or just private or just read heavy or just write heavy, right? It is almost never that black and white. And so people really need that level of control to be able to use us at all, because otherwise they'd just be stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. So I feel like at this point, it probably makes sense to start looking at how to use this. I feel like we've got a good kind of philosophical foundation of
Let's do it.
The trade-off. So let me switch us over into pair programming mode. At which point we will find out.
Chat, please try if the boop thing works. I feel very sad that I haven't been showered in boops yet. I feel very sad about that.
I am very sad that who knew that things would just break when I haven't touched them. I'm imagining that I probably let something like a token expire or something. But so let's do a quick shout out to our live captioning. We've got Rachel here from White Coat Captioning taking all these down for us. So if you want to see those, they are on the homepage of the site, like they are every week. Thank you so much for that. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, Fauna, and Auth0, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which I very much appreciate. And oh boy, lots and lots of boops are happening in the chat,
see the
and
boops
none of them
finally
are falling down. No. Okay, well,
at least they're in chat. They're
in the chat. Yeah. So, okay. We're talking to Max today. Make sure you go and talk to Max on Twitter. You can give him a follow. We're talking about GraphCDN specifically today. And at that point, I am now just, Max, what should I do first if we want to try this thing out?
Well, first of all, I will just say there's one more plug that we have to do before we jump in, which is if you don't have one of these things yet, go to the Learn with Jason shop. Freaking buy one because they're freaking amazing. I'm just going to do the plug for you. Get one of these. They're amazing. Jason's going to post a link in chat, I'm sure.
I just dropped a link in chat. Yes, you can absolutely go get one of these rainbow corgi ducks. Yeah, I think I just have a bug like in general on my site today, and I don't know what's going on. Okay, we're going to debug that a different day. But something's up. Let me know if this doesn't.
Something's really broken. That's weird.
Something is very slow, it feels like. I don't know exactly what's going on.
We can spend 10 minutes investigating. I feel like the boops are a big part of the stream. Like we
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what's going on. I'm getting 502s from my API. That's always nice. Unexpected.
Oh,
Cool. Okay. Well, we'll dig into that after the stream. Figure out what's going on. Is it like my whole thing is down? No, that works. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, y'all. I'm gonna guess that I did something silly and have just need to go and do a quick investigation of my functions error logs that I'm not gonna do right now. So, but yeah. So let's see here. We are going to dig into GraphCDN, and to do that, we're gonna need a GraphQL API, which you have set up for us. So let me grab this.
yeah.
And
So I've set up a very simple GraphQL API based on a template by Ibrahima92. Go start that repo because it's a really great template. I just took that and extended it ever so slightly, added some more mutations that we're going to need today. But great template. Go start it on GitHub. He really deserves some stars. I don't know if he's watching. Probably not, but hopefully he gets some stars from this. So I've prepared this GraphQL API. And what I would recommend we do is just let's create a simple website for it. It's a list of projects. Let's just try and render it so you can create new ones and maybe update an existing one. And then let's try and add GraphCDN to it. Let's just go from there. The whole thing's deployed on Netlify, of course. So there's a Netlify.app domain that we can visit afterwards as well, and where everybody can play around with the API. And then hopefully we can see the impact of caching and invalidation and everything else.
Great. Okay, so what I have done, just so everyone who wasn't following my terminal input can see, is I use a format on my computer where I just keep everything organized by like GitHub style.
I love that. So, I do the exact same thing. It is so major key.
It makes my life so much easier.
Highly recommended.
So I have cloned the serverless GraphQL Airtable extended repo, and I just made sure I was using...
Name. I mean, what a gorgeous name. Easy to remember, easy to type. Super great name, Max. Fantastic.
Okay, and so now we have in here a serverless function, and Netlify is configured to read that serverless function out of here. So we have we've got our Apollo server. We have some type defs. Let me make this a little bit bigger. We're pulling in the details about getting projects. So let's see if I can infer based on what's in this file. And this is, I think, where the power of GraphQL becomes apparent, because chat, I would encourage you to follow along as well. See how much of this just makes sense by reading it, and how much you know about this API just by looking at the definition here. So we have a type of project. Okay, so I'm assuming this is an API about projects. And for each project, I have an ID, a name, a description, and a date. Good. We have an input. Okay, so this is a API where I can add projects. So we can add a project, name, description, date. We can update a project. Again, ID, name, description, date. And then we have queries down here, which will let me get all of my projects, and that's an array of projects. A project with an ID, so I can search for an individual project, and that'll give me a single project, which is why it's not in brackets. And then we have a mutation to create a project or update a project, both of which use these inputs that correspond and return the project that was affected. Did I get it right?
100%. And I just now realized there's an inconsistency in there that's making me nervous already. The mutation is called create project, but I called the input add project. That is... I didn't pay attention to that.
It's all right. It's all right. Okay. And so then in resolvers, we have the query projects, which maps to query projects, runs a function called get all projects, which I'm assuming returns an array of projects. Project
Correct.
Itself returns a get project of args. I'm assuming the args are going to look like ID and whatever in an object. In a mutation, we feed in the fields from the project input. Create, same thing. We feed in the args. And these all map to utilities that do Airtable stuff, which we're not going to get into today, but that we just know, we know that these will work. But I do notice that I have some keys that I need to get. Now you have sent those to me, so I'm going to grab them out of
In the meantime, Jay Molivas, you're absolutely right. If you actually want to use Airtable as a GraphQL backend, check out BaseQL. BaseQL is really cool and gives you just a GraphQL API for any Airtable base. It's really smart. The reason I didn't use that here is because we're actually going to look at the invalidation later, and I wanted to make sure that we have a place to add that code. So I needed to write a GraphQL API myself. But really cool. If you actually want to do this, BaseQL, highly, highly recommend it. Really cool project.
Yeah. Let's pull up BaseQL actually, so we can show everybody this link.
100%.
And head over here. Make sure that shows up in the show notes for people, because that is going to be easier. But yeah, we want to be able to play around and break it, right? So
Exactly. We could not break this. We want to break it a little bit. So gotta make sure that we can do that.
So I've added my environment variables, and now having done that, I'm gonna run npm install to get everything that we need, because we have a few dependencies here: Airtable, Apollo Server Lambda. Apollo Server Lambda. Why do we need that?
I honestly don't know. Maybe that doesn't.
Oh, Apollo Server Lambda. Yeah, that's what we need. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we have Apollo Server Lambda,
the netlify function,
GraphQL, and then when we run our netlify function, we can just run netlify dev, and it's going to pick up our function. So if I go to
functions GraphQL, so .netlify/functions,
netlify functions GraphQL.
That's the
and
one,
you turned on the playground. Thank you for that.
Of course.
So now we can run a query. So I'm going to just prefix this with query, and I'm going to put a couple of these in here. So let's load all projects, and I'm going to do one of these. This is my favorite. I'm going to hit Control Space, and it shows me everything I can get. So I can just grab these things right out of here. I'm going to get the name, we'll get the description, and let's get the date. And then I'm going to run it.
Now, and thankfully, I've already put some things in there. Otherwise, this would now be an empty list. But I've got stuff in my Airtable.
This is wonderful. And then we can show one of the more powerful features of GraphQL, which is that if we don't need the date, for example, we just drop it, and then we don't get that data. And this is really important when you start thinking about apps that do server-side rendering or rehydration or anything like that. If you're using, for example, Astro, Remix, Next, etc., and you make a query for data, it doesn't just like know what data it's using and stick that into the page. It actually stores the responses of queries as JSON that it then ships to the browser. So you want to make sure you're not overfetching, because if you query for data that you're not using, it'll get sent to the browser even if you don't use it. This is actually the kind of the unfortunate and slightly funny cause of that like viewing sources hacking breach, because there was a website here in the US where the government site had queried everything about people, including like social security numbers, like stuff you definitely shouldn't be querying. They weren't using it in the output on the page, but because they'd queried it, it got stuck into that JSON file. So somebody could get into the JSON and just pull all this user data, which is why it's so important that you pare down data. With REST, you'd have to run a map and remove all the fields that you're not using, or some other transformation on the data. With GraphQL, you just remove the field. You only want the name? We got you. Look at this. You want a list of names? If I can, oh my God, I can't type though. Look, just a list of names. That's all we're sending to the browser now.
I think the interesting thing is it really starts becoming powerful once you have relations in there, right? This simple API doesn't have any relations. It's just a list of projects. But you can imagine that you have projects which have authors, which have their own list of projects, and then maybe they have teams and organizations that manage those projects. And so you have this super deep relation thing. And you don't always want all of the relations, but sometimes you want some of them, right? If you're looking at a list of projects, you probably want to show every project's name and then its author, right? When you go to the authors page, you want to show the author, but then maybe also all of their teams. When you go to the team page, you want to show all of the people in that team, et cetera, right? And as your use cases become more complex, your GraphQL API becomes ever more important, because suddenly you don't have to fetch all of the data always at once, even though you don't even need it. You can just get exactly what you need. That's it. And that's really, really, really nice.
Mm-hmm.
not just for security, but also for performance and just general developer productivity. It's just nice.
Yeah, it's really, really nice. Let me add. So what I'm going to do is just add some query variables here. And actually, I don't need to do variables yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just going to drop it in as a string. And I'm going to take this one.
Perfect.
Move over here. And here's a cool thing. When I try to do this, now it gives me an option, which is why I added these names. So I'm going to load project by ID. There we go. Okay.
Nice.
Now I want to add something, and I'm going to say add new project. And in here we can create project. Here we go, create project. And that takes a project. And inside here, I need a name. I have to actually fill these out first, don't I? I need a description. And I need a date.
I just want to while you're doing this, I just want to very quickly call out. I know that you've shown GraphQL on this on the stream multiple times before, but Jason's using this API without having ever seen it before. Like literally, right? Like he's never used this API before. He's never queried for projects. He's never created one. He's never done any of this before. And he just goes into the playground, presses command space or control space, sees what's there, and just goes and does it. And I think that is an incredible thing about GraphQL that I absolutely love. And I think that's really underappreciated a little bit. I know people appreciate it, but like it's awesome. You know what I mean? Like that is just great. Like you could just go in and do this. Like everything is just going to work, and it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do. Man, just makes me happy to see that. You know,
it really is nice. And then we can get back the ID and the name. So I didn't create an ID, so this should theoretically do that for us. Okay, now we have a new ID, and if I load all projects, there it is.
Go.
Here's our new project. So yeah, just to reinforce what Max just said, I don't know what the Airtable looks like. I've never seen it before. I've never looked at this GraphQL API before, but because of the autocomplete and the schema, that was enough for me to know what was possible and to just do it. And I think that self-documenting nature. And here's the other really, really important thing. The documentation is the code. So this isn't a case where they can drift out of place, where like I start and I have this beautifully documented API and then, oh no, something's on fire. I fixed it. Didn't have time to update the docs. Now it's inconsistent. Like I have to update the docs as part of fixing the API because of the way GraphQL is designed. And that is a really, really powerful way to look at this.
100%. And it just makes me happy to see you do this. It's just... And I think also like an important call out is here. It's really important. This only works because GraphQL is a specification, right? Someone sat down and very clearly defined what it means for an API to be a GraphQL API. And that might sound like a minor point, but that's really important because that means you can build a GraphQL playground once and it works for any GraphQL API. No matter what GraphQL API you create, no matter which one you use, it's just gonna work. And that is one of the most important and most powerful things. But let's go and create a website for this incredible GraphQL API that we've now been talking about for 10 minutes that doesn't even do that much.
What's going on here? How dare you? All my Emmett, why? No, I'm going to have to figure out how to write a doc type from scratch. Okay, so we're going to go doc type HTML. I'm going to get some of this wrong. Yeah,
I am 100% going to get all of this wrong. I don't
what
know
else? What else do we need in here? We need a head tag. We need a body tag.
Yeah, gotta have a body. Gotta have a head.
I think we might just have to let this be a little bit wrong because I need like a meta care set. TF8. How wrong is this? I need a content viewport. I'm going to skip it. I'm going to just say, let's just set that up, and then I'm going to stop and restart the server so it picks up that local file for us. And then when I come back out here, we have that.
Gorgeous.
Oh, it thinks it's nunjucks. That's why this didn't work. Okay, let's try this one more time. Ah, Good catch,
Nice.
chat.
Here for dev streams.
Appreciate you.
And PyQN before.
Okay,
This
so
is amazing. You can just stream yourself coding and people will fix your code for you. How good is that? Like you
The
just have two
ultimate
people
hack.
calling out and be like, Jason, here's what you gotta do. Ah man, I wish I had that when I'm coding. There's always just someone sitting in the back being like, Max, you gotta do this instead. Like this is wrong.
Yeah, and it's nice
Beautiful.
that it's like real people in the chat and not just my inner monologue telling me I'm wrong.
We appreciate you, chat.
Yeah, mega pair programming, mob programming, chat programming, all of those things. So let's do
GitHub
this.
Copilot if we have chat. That was 100% accurate.
Absolutely. GitHub Copilot. We don't need you robots. We got the community. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a quick function to load all projects. And that is going to, let's get a response. And that's going to be await fetch. And we're going to get our own API. So we'll go to Netlify functions, GraphQL. And I'm going to send this because this is a GraphQL post. We always have to send GraphQL as post. I guess we don't have to, but that's the convention. I don't need any headers, right?
You will need a header to set the content type to JSON. That's actually one of the most common mistakes that people make. Is we in our engineering interview we ask people to build something with GraphQL, and that is the most common thing that people miss.
Can you remind me how this works? You add accept.
It's accept application / JSON, and then the other one is content type application / JSON.
Not my own name. What am I doing?
And then it's content - type, and that is application / JSON as well. And that just tells both the browser, that tells the server that the browser is sending JSON and wants JSON back, right? That's essentially what this is telling the server, which is really important because otherwise your GraphQL server will try to load your query data from somewhere completely different because it doesn't realize that body is JSON. So super important, that thing that people often miss.
Okay, so now we're going to show maybe my third favorite thing about GraphQL, which is that we ran this and we made sure that it works. And now I just get to copy paste it into my app.
Nice.
So that will give us our projects. Now that we have this, I can do the like most bare bones logging.
Hey, at least you're not using log4j, you know what I mean? Like you're more secure than most Java apps out there.
Goodness.
Sorry, that was low. That was a low jab. That was a low jab. It could have happened to you just as badly.
Let's see, response.json is what we'll get back, and then we can how do we want to do this? Look, for now, let's just console log it.
Let's make sure it works.
And then we call it, which I named this load all projects. All right, so let's start there. We'll head back to our home page. I'm going to get the console open, and I'm going to stick it to this side because most of what we're going to do today is actually going to be in the console.
Nice.
So here we go. We've got our list of projects. So let's get these on the screen. I'm going to simplify this data a bit by return. Well, let's just get projects out. So we can destructure a little bit, drop our projects in, reload. Nope, screwed it up. Because
it's data and then projects, I think.
All right, so now this is
classic.
Here's where. All right, so now we actually have an array, and this is not my favorite thing that I've ever written, but I'm gonna leave it alone because it does the job, and this is not going to be production code. Now that we have our project.
Wait, this is not production code, Jason. What do you mean? I thought we're building a business here. Like, what are you talking about? My hacky GraphQL API Airtable thing isn't production code. What do you mean?
Let's see, list of projects, and then I'm gonna put together an unordered list, and for ease of use, we're gonna give this a class of projects. So then down here, what I can do is I can get our project list will be document.querySelector projects. And then
But
I
can't remember the last time I did all this stuff manually. I've been
I
doing
know,
it
it's
so
been a
long.
while, right?
Oh my God.
So we can then do a for each project. And inside of here, we are going to, we'll create a new item. And that is going to be a document create element list item. And then we can go item dot inner text. Yeah, inner text
I guess inner text
equals project dot name. Maybe we just start there to make sure that this works. And then we will project list dot append child item. And theoretically speaking, what happens at the end of that is we get a list. Hey, look at it go.
Hey, whoop. It works.
So now we've got that. So then the other thing that I want to be able to do is actually create. I don't need this to be a section, do I? I can just make it a form. So let's make it a form. And what we're going to do with our form is we'll create a label. And for this, we need something to take in the name, name, description, and date, right? So we can do name, and then we'll get an input ID of name.
Start with name probably.
Name of name.
Make sure that works.
It'll work with just the name. Like it's not going to fail if I put in. Okay, great.
No.
So
we
let's
can start
put
with
in
just a name if we have time.
type text. Okay, and then we'll do a button of type submit, and we'll say save project. And maybe what we should do here. That was why I was going to do a section, is so that I could add an H2 that says add a new project. And we'll just move all of this
Beautiful.
up. Okay. So here we can add a new project. And in that project, we're going to include a name. So we need to have, let's
Create form or something, maybe? Add form, yeah. That works.
So we'll call it add form, and down here we'll create a new function. I don't like how we're doing that. I'm going to do it differently. Let's collapse this one. And I'm going to put this as another async function, and we'll call this one create project. Boy, this naming inconsistency is real.
I know,
can see
man.
how
It's getting to me. It's getting to me. Oh.
So we're going to create a project, and that one is going to accept an event because we're going to attach it to the form event submit. So the first thing that we're going to do is event.prevent default. Then we're going to use my favorite browser API that I've learned about recently, which is the form data API from event.target. And now we can get the name from data.get name. And then what we can do is we want to create a project. So we will actually take a lot of the code that we wrote in here, which we could more than likely abstract out a little bit, but I'm not going to do it right now. And we will, instead of the load all projects, we'll go back over here and get the create project. And put that in here. Nope. Okay, so now we've got the ability to create a new project, but I want to do it by variable. So now it makes sense to introduce variables.
Yeah.
And I'm going to include name, and we'll just leave these other ones out for now. And that should give us back our name, and the variable that we need to send in is name, which we pulled out of the form response. Okay, then we check if the response is okay, and we will console.log, if I can spell it right, response.json. And this will just show us whether or not our submission worked.
Let's also refresh the screen. Let's just do a window.location.reload or something. I don't actually know how to reload the screen. Is it window.location.reload? Is that a thing?
Should work, I think.
Man, my brain.
So then down here, we also want to add just a. Okay, we'll just add a. Just a little delineation of like setup versus execution. So we'll do a document dot query selector, and that was create project.
I think add form.
Create form. Fixing this.
Yes, perfect. Perfect.
Go create.
By the way, I will also say I don't know how many of you watchers. Actually, I'm curious. If you're in the chat, write in there a yes or a 1 if you are a coder working at a company. And write in there a 0 if you're a student or if you're just learning coding or if you're new to it. I'm really curious what the spread is. And I say that because if you're a student and you're looking at this and you're like, because we're joking that this is not production code, this doesn't look too different from what people write. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is very similar to what you would see when you go work at a company. It's maybe a little bit more different, but not that much.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. We got a lot of 1s coming in the chat.
That's awesome. So then you all know this is not that different from the code you write. Hopefully a little bit, but not too much.
Yep, got a couple students as well. Welcome, and a professor. Hey, Cynthia, thank you for joining.
Oh.
So let's see, try out web-based submission, and let's see if we got this right on the first try. Oh, chat, let this go down in history that this might be the first time I'm not lying when I say it worked on the first try. Oh my goodness.
I've never been able to do that. Incredible.
I am very happy that just worked on the first try. Holy buckets, everyone. So this is, but this, like, look how cool this is. All right, but here's the thing. We just did a bunch of stuff, and we also created a potential problem for ourselves because, note, this is fine, right? Like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it does take a certain amount of time to make this happen. So let's go to the network tab here, and let's just look at what happens. This takes, let's make it a little bit bigger, 400 milliseconds to execute. And that includes, like, we have to go to the function, which then has to go to Airtable, which then has to come back, get processed, and then return us our data. And if I had to guess, I would say that probably the bulk of that is going to be the HTTP request of getting over to Airtable, getting that data back, which is not a problem. Like, this is still plenty fast. This isn't like oh no, I'm in danger. But as we get more and more data, and as the data that we have gets more and more complex, it actually might start becoming an issue, right? So what should we, like, how, this is where I feel like I'd start looking at GraphQL or GraphCDN. How do we use it to improve this experience?
Let's do one more thing, Jason. Before we dive into GraphCDN, I want to make sure that we do one more thing, which is let's also update a project name. Let's add a way to just update a project name. Okay. Just that there's a mutation in there, update project. Let's use that in another form somewhere. Can be super hacky, but let's just make sure to add that because I want to show you something afterwards when we're in GraphCDN that's really important. Okay,
so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to only fetch the ID and the name. And what I am going to do is I'm going to item add. Ooh, crap. What is it? It's attribute. What are the data attributes? Set attribute?
I don't actually.
You know what? I'm not sure what you're trying to do. I'm going to do it like this. I'm just going to set the ID to project ID so that we can pull it in and grab it when we click on the update. And then,
of course,
to update this, we need to. What's going to be the fastest way to do this?
Maybe we just update the title to something hard coded. Like, let's just submit. Like, let's just. When you click on a title, let's change it to you clicked on this project or something.
Gotcha. Maybe? Okay. Yeah. Let's do that. So we will add a. Let's do it like this. We've got load all projects for each of these. We can.
I will just say while Jason is thinking about this, PythQN. I hope the coding interview went well. You got it first try, so good luck on that job application. Those are freaking scary.
So I'm going to create a button, and I'm going to update link on or add event listener, and we'll make it a click.
Add event listener.
And in here, we're just going to hard code this. We won't even need the event. No, we won't even need the event because we got it here. We're defining it here. So we'll be able to say, take this response. Oh boy, we're copy pasting a lot of boilerplate for this, but it's going to be okay. We're going to take this code, put it in here, and what that code is going to allow us to do is...
You know what? We can even make it a little bit more real world. We're just going to call that button the redact button. And we're just going to change the name to redacted. How does that sound?
Oh, yeah, that works. Okay.
Then it's not just a random button that does stuff. It's actually you're redacting things. You know what I mean? Totally what we planned at the beginning of the stream. That's exactly how this website was supposed to work from the get-go.
All right. So our update link is going to be a button, which means I should probably call it a button. So our update button is going to say redact title. And when you click it, it will send off a request to update project. And we do need an ID.
Yep.
So the ID for the project to do that is over here somewhere. I'm going to just use this is how I develop in GraphQL. Is I would just come out here, type in mutation. We're going to say update project. I know we need an ID, so I'm going to put that in. And then down here, I'm going to start typing, what was it? Update project.
Oh, that's fine too.
And then that needs project. And that is an ID, is that right?
That is actually an object that contains
Got it.
both the ID, but also the properties that you want to update.
So like the name, I got it. Case. So in this case, we're gonna do one of these.
Beautiful.
Right? And then what we will get back is going to be the ID and the name.
Exactly.
Okay, so that will work. I'm not going to test it here because I want to actually see this happen. So I'm going to drop this in. Oh, I screwed that up. Let me get this out of here.
I think you did. There's another thing at the top. That's maybe too much.
Oh, what did I do? Oh boy, I made a whole mess in here, didn't I?
That was good.
1, 3, 1 extra. Okay. Let's just clean that up a bit. Right.
And then variables. Variables, you want to pass in the ID of the project rather than the name.
Yes. So let's add in the ID, which will be project.id. So because we have access to that out here, we don't need to pass it in or anything like that. We could, but we're not going to bother because this is faster and we're trying to prove something, not write the world's best front-end code.
Correct.
So then when I go back here and refresh the page, I forgot to append it. So we're going to item.append child and add our button, update button.
Oh man. This append child business reminds me that I once wrote a... Oh yeah! Okay, let's see if it works before I tell my story.
So...
Yo!
2-in-1 show!
First try,
chat. This has gotta be a record.
Possible? Jason's a god. that is my takeaway from this. That is my takeaway from this. I can't believe that worked first try 2 times in a row.
Here's the thing. This will never happen again. This is like this is one of those once in a lifetime world record setting. You know, it's gonna just be we're getting right into the rut after that. It's gonna get bad. Okay, so we have now the ability to create and update and list projects, and we've got about call it 20-ish minutes to set up GraphCDN. So let's see how it goes.
Absolutely. So first thing you want to do is sign up for GraphCDN, and then it's going to hopefully ask you to input a... Actually...
Do I need to deploy?
Sorry. Yes, I think you might need to deploy, or actually, no. You don't. We can use GraphCDN CLI because our engineers worked on something called GraphCDN Serve. Okay, let's
Okay.
sign up to GraphCDN and then ignore the entire signup flow. Go to your terminal and run npm install global GraphCDN in your terminal.
Just like all the way.
Yeah, just all the way. Just literally
npm
ignore
install
our
global
website.
graph CDN
Exactly. In
CLI like that.
Word. No, just GraphCDN.
Oh, just graph CDN. Got it.
Yep. And then run GraphCDN login,
Okay.
which will hopefully get you to the website and then get you back into the CLI, and you'll be logged in with the CLI. Okay,
Here
nice. And now let's run GraphCDN serve. And that actually needs some arguments that I don't know off the top of my head. Just try running that and see what it does. It might give you an error that hopefully tells you what you need to do. Okay, that is not what we want. That's not what we want. Try running graph. We might need a service already. Okay, so you do have to run through the onboarding flow in the. This is great user testing, by the way. You do have to run through the onboarding on the website because we do need a service.
Can I do it with one of these or?
Oh yeah, try that. Oh yeah, run GraphCDN in it. Let's try it.
Love help. What is your production GraphQL endpoint?
Okay, hold on. We do have that. We're fine on that front. Let me get you that URL because of course this is again deployed on Netlify. So.
Oh, you deployed this GraphQL API already?
I've already deployed it on Netlify. You can also do it yourself if you want. I'm fine either way.
You know what? Let's deploy it. So here's what I'm going to do. We'll just run through the whole flow. We'll do this really fast. So
perfect.
I am going to add a remote for the fork. Yes. Okay. So now I have somewhat confused myself by putting this into my own. But now what I can do is I have we have a git remote for it. And so I have origin, which is mine, upstream, and I'm going to git add all. Okay, we're going to git commit and say getting ready for GraphCDN. I'm going to push it. Off it goes. Then I'm going to netlify init. And we're going to create and configure a new site. Put it on my team. And we're going to call this GraphCDN projects.
Yes.
We're going to authorize with GitHub through app.netlify.com. Here we go. Excuse me. I think I just...
Bless you.
Here we go. Why did you open Chrome, you weirdo? This will happen fast. Oh boy, got something caught in my throat. This is going to get exciting for all of us.
I can narrate Jason's actions. Jason's opening 1Password. He is putting it off the screen so that we can't see the length of his password.
Okay.
He's using 1Password to get his GitHub password, and then he's going to authenticate into GitHub. Imagine if that was just your life. Imagine if that would happen every single time you did something. How annoying would that be? Just have all of your actions authentic. Oh my God.
I could actually get into having a narrator. I feel like that would be fun for me. What on earth is happening right now? So the problem that I'm running into is that I think I broke some stuff on my browser. I am logged in. Well, it was already going. God, that's super frustrating. There is no build command. We're going to deploy the current directory. We have functions set up. Good. Here we go. Adding deploy key to repository. So I think I need to figure out why it keeps trying to open Chrome because that's not my default browser anymore.
Yep.
So that site is running. And if I head over to app.netlify.com, we will see, here's my team. Here's GraphCDN projects. The deploy is starting up. Should happen nice and fast because it is, we don't have to build it. It's just going to push these functions in the index file up. Build ready to start. Did you hang on me?
Starting up.
I'm just gonna Let's try this one more time, just in case. There it is.
There you go.
Very rarely I hit that, but let's see. Using 16.13.1. Good. Here we go.
This seems fine.
We don't have too many NPM packages, so this should happen nice and quickly. Off we go.
By the way, people, just to call out, how quick is it to deploy something to Netlify? Freaking good service. I gotta plug your things now, Jason. Am I really plugging your things?
No, I appreciate it.
I feel like you're plugging my things the whole time, so I gotta do some reverse plugs. Have I mentioned yet? If you haven't gotten one of these little, what are they called in English? One of these little things. What are they even? Rubber ducks. Rubber ducks. Man, my brain farted for a second there. If you haven't got one of these rubber corgis, really should get one.
Okay, so something that I did.
Wait, there's a corgi emoji. Wait, do I have access to that now?
You do indeed. Why did I get a 502 on this? Oh, I know why I got a 502. Yeah. It's because I didn't set up my environment variables yet. So watch this. Okay, I'm not going to run this on screen because I think it'll show the contents, but you can run netlify env:\import and then the name of your .env file, and we'll just pull that into the app for you. So I'm going to run this. And it does indeed show the values, so I'm going to show you just a little hint. See, here's what it did. You see it over there? Isn't that great? So it just added those environment variables. And now if I clear this, I can bring it back over. And I'm going to do one more build. So let's trigger a deploy. Here we go. And this one will happen nice and fast because we should be cached. Should be.
How often have you messed up and shown env variables on stream and had to clear
every other
from
stream
the services? Surely that must happen constantly, right?
To the point that if sound effects were happening, Ben would have just played the hacker command. At one point in the past, actually, we had one where the chat realized that I hadn't locked down an API yet, so they went in and started editing the database in the background.
No.
And we were just completely stumped as to what was going on because the data kept changing. We're like, why isn't this working? And then finally somebody edited the database to say, you should probably lock down your API keys. And we're like, oh no!
Chat.
Okay, so now, there we go. We've got our API keys in place and we have ourselves a full working project. And if we go to the network tab, we can see, this is happening nice and quick. Once we get to the production servers, we're a little bit closer to where I assume Airtable's production servers are. So things start happening fast, but they could be faster. So
correct.
Now that I have this, my endpoint is going to be functions GraphQL, right?
Yeah.
And if I go back to GraphCDN init.
Yes.
This is my endpoint, right?
We are here. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
No. Oops. Oh, it just did the thing for me. Nice. Okay.
Perfect.
I have an org. Created
so
service.
This has now created a GraphCDN service that's pointed at this GraphQL API. We're not actually going to use this GraphCDN service. We're just going to run GraphCDN serve, which is basically like a development. Okay. Now we need to provide the backend port, which is our local development port, which I think is 80 or 80. This, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Does that mean I need to start the?
Yes, you will need to start a server because essentially what we're doing is we're creating a GraphCDN service that's going to proxy through to this API. So it's going to go to GraphCDN and then go back down to you, to your local machine, and it's going to proxy to your local GraphQL API. And the second thing you'll need to do is do a / path and do .netlify / function / GraphQL, just so that it knows, I'm proxying through to localhost 8080.
Okay.
/ netlify / function / GraphQL.
Here?
I think that should work.
Do the thing.
Let's see. Let's hope that this works, man.
Here we go.
Let's hope that this works. This is a live test. We only recently added this to the CLI, so this might break. And if it breaks, we'll have to figure out another way to do this. But I hope that it works. Yes.
GraphCDN is running.
Good. So now go to localhost 3010, and you should see a GraphQL playground.
Ooh.
Please. Now try running some queries and see if it works.
Okay, let me get our queries from over here. I think it was, nope, here. Okay, so we've got our queries. I'm going to load all projects. Ta-da!
Yes.
Should I hit this tracing button?
So, I don't actually know what that does. And I don't think that does what we want. I think you just want to look at the... So what is happening now? This is going to localhost 3010. GraphCDN serve is redirecting that to GraphCDN. It's going through our gateway, and then it's going back down to Jason's local machine, to the local GraphQL API, and it lets you look at your local GraphQL API. And the reason we added it is because for exactly this use case, you want to change your GraphQL API locally, you got to also change your GraphCDN configuration. Maybe you got to do some stuff with GraphCDN. You want to see what the cache does locally. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have GraphCDN serve. And so now from the client or from our website, rather than hitting, this is now
this got generated for me, which is really handy.
Yes. So this is now your GraphCDN configuration. And this has one rule by default, which just caches everything for 5 minutes, which is exactly what we want.
Okay.
Talvs asks in the chat, is the gateway a netlify function? No, the GraphCDN gateway, GraphCDN is based on Fastly. So this is running on Fastly in whatever is nearest to JSON, right? I don't actually know what the nearest, probably Portland. I actually don't know what the nearest point of presence for you is, but the next metro city probably has one. And so that is where Fastly's location is, and that is where our gateways run. Anyways. So now from the index.html file, rather than hitting the local GraphQL API, we want to hit the localhost 3010 API.
Localhost 3010. Okay, so I don't want to hit, here we go. Let's go for every one of these. Nope. I'm going to go HTTP, localhost 3010. All right.
We don't need the path afterwards. If you do the path afterwards, it's
that's break. Right. I don't need the path afterwards.
Exactly.
Just make sure I did that on all of them. Good. Okay.
Perfect.
Now,
let's open the website. And this is now powered by GraphCDN. If you look at your network tab,
this one goes to localhost 3010.
And if you scroll down in the response headers there should be some GCDN headers in there. Scroll down a little bit.
GCDN. Here we go. It's a cache hit.
And we've already got a cache hit. So now this is cached in GraphCDN.
And so look how fast that was. Just as a general, like 20 milliseconds is much faster than the 400 we were getting before locally. So we have about 7-ish minutes left.
That's cool. Let me show you something that's really cool. If you try to create a project from the website, just create a new project.
On here.
No. Just on the actual. on your,
right. Okay,
on our
Sorry.
website.
Got
on
myself
our website, Jason.
I was like, I don't.
Create a project here.
Okay.
So what's going to happen is this is not going to show up when you refresh. Try save project, and then when you refresh, it's not going to show up. And the reason is because exactly. This is now cached. But the cool thing is, click on redact title on any one of these projects.
Do the same one that we already did.
Sure. And now it's going to show up.
All right.
So what just happened is, the reason this works is because GraphCDN analyzes every query and every mutation that passes through the gateway. And the project list mutation contains a list of 4 projects, or now 5 projects, right? And we look at every single project and we go, oh, this is the project with the ID X, this is the project with the ID Y, this is the project with the ID Z. And when you press the redact title mutation, the update project, which the redact title button, it triggers the update project mutation. And from that mutation comes back a project with the ID X. And now we know, oh, look, we have the list of projects that contains the project with the ID X. And there was just a mutation that passed through our gateway that returned the project with the ID X. Hold on, we got to invalidate that list. We got to kick that out of the cache, right? Because that is for sure out of date.
So when we know the ID, GraphCDN can infer that data is out of date. But when we create a new project, the ID doesn't exist, so it wouldn't show up anywhere. So we would have to tell GraphCDN, hey, when I create a project, you also need to invalidate this list of queries.
Exactly. So we have an invalidation API, and we don't have time to get into it, unfortunately, but you can basically just do a fetch call from the server and be like, oh, a new project was created. Let me invalidate the projects list because I know that a new item was just added to it. Got it. That's really the power of GraphCDN. We do this automatically for every mutation where we can. But then for some edge cases, you still have the power of going in and manually saying, hey, look, we created a new project. Let's just go do this.
All right. So where does one find? Here's the docs. We don't have time to get into it, but how do we? Is it manually or
purge. Yes.
manually purge? Okay.
Try that, and then there's a purging API explanation there, and you can purge by anything, right? So you can really purge by, hey, I want to purge any query that contains the project with the ID X or the project with the ID Y or all projects or anything you want, and it's very, very, very granular.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So that seems like something that would be reasonable. So we could kind of get into mutation. We would purge project with an ID of whatever, and that would clean the whole thing up. Okay,
you got it 100%.
Cool.
And essentially, we just do that automatically under the hood for mutations, right? We just go in and we look at it and we say, oh, look, this mutation returned the project with the ID X. Let's just purge any query that contains the project with the ID X because it has probably changed. That's essentially how the automatic mutation, in very simple terms, works.
Yeah. So this, I think, this is a pretty quick overview. It's pretty powerful stuff. If I want to take this to production in our last couple of minutes here, do I just swap out for my live endpoint?
Exactly. So you now have a live endpoint. If you go to your GraphCDN dashboard, graphcdn.io/dashboard, you will see the exact URL. And that is then pointed at your deployed API rather than at localhost, right? And so you'll have serverless GraphQL Airtable extended here. And so you have serverless GraphQL Airtable extended.graphcdn.app at the bottom. And if you click to the API playground, you'll see the same thing. And this is now pointed at the production GraphQL API. Taos, good call out. 5 million requests for free. Our free plan is insanely generous. If you have a GraphQL API, you can use us for a very long time for free. That is very much on purpose. We want developers like you, Jason, or me that use GraphQL for their personal website. You should just be able to use us. You know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't have to pay us money. Like, we're happy to support you. And so everything counts as a request, but 5 million gets you very far. That gets you to about probably 100,000 monthly page use, maybe a little bit more, somewhere in that order of magnitude.
Okay, so this adds GraphCDN. So I'm going to push that up. And does anything need to change for this to, like, I don't need to configure anything, right? It's just going to work?
It's just going to work. That's it.
Very cool.
And of course, again, the create project mutation, we would have to add the fetch call into the create project mutation in our backend to make sure that we invalidate. When we create a project, we invalidate the query. But this will work.
And is this the sort of thing that, like, is the long-term vision that I would be able to just add a rule or like a dependency in a rule that says, these are the mutations or queries that should invalidate this cache?
Yeah.
That's very cool. Because that's what's also exciting about that is that starts to open the door for, like, well, now the computer can just do that for me because GraphQL is statically analyzable. Hooray!
Exactly. Jason, you get it. That's why that's so powerful, right? Like, we can look at your GraphQL API and we can go, oh, we know what you're sending here. We know what we're looking at. So everything's just gonna work.
Mm-hmm. And so let's just take a peek at how fast this becomes. Look, 9 milliseconds to get that GraphQL back. And, like, even on a tiny amount of data like that, it is a noticeable difference. Like, this is very, very cool. Chat, if y'all want to go play with this, feel free. I imagine all of the titles will be redacted very shortly. But so with that, that is all we've got time for today. What should somebody do if they want to go deeper here? What are next steps for folks who are excited about learning more about GraphQL, more about GraphCDN?
More about GraphQL, go just check out pre-made GraphQL APIs, right? Like, go check out the GitHub GraphQL API, Shopify GraphQL API. Play around with them. They're great ways to play around with things. There's also a Star Wars GraphQL API that doesn't even require authentication. Bunch of stuff. If you want to learn more about GraphCDN, just go sign up. We have a button there that says, I don't have a GraphQL API, show me a demo, and we'll just give you a demo GraphCDN service. And you can play around with that. That points at the GitHub GraphQL API. So you can see what that feels like when it's super fast, which is really, really cool.
This was the
demo thing,
the demo that showed up. So I just clicked the use demo data and it built this for me.
Exactly.
Is there a first steps kind of?
Yes,
here we go. Yeah,
set up GraphCDN from scratch. We have docs for everything. Our docs will need to improve as well. We're working on those, but they should get you there hopefully. And if you have a GraphQL API that you're running in production, hit me up. Feel free to DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm happy to help anyone get set up with GraphCDN. This is my job now, thankfully, which I'm very, very excited about. So feel free to ping me anytime. Very, very happy to help anyone get set up with GraphCDN.
Yes. And if you want to see the code that we wrote today, it's already pushed up, so you can see it here. This will give you everything you need. The site is again posted at graphcdnprojects.netlify.app. You can find it there. Max, this was a blast. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Let's do a little bit of shouting out here. We've had Rachel with us from Whitecoat Captioning all day today. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, Fauna, and Auth0, all of whom are kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. While you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and look at the schedule. We have incredible stuff coming up, with more being added every day. We're going to do a full stack serverless app with Next and Fauna. We have some marketing automation with Customer IO. That's going to be a lot of fun. TRPC is very cool. I have no idea how it works, but I'm really excited to learn. Supabase, N8N automation, Slinkity, if you haven't heard about this, is very cool. And like how to write better content, and I've a whole bunch more that I haven't added to the site yet. So make sure you head over there, hit this add on Google Calendar button to get it added on your Google Calendar. You can follow on Twitch and you'll get notified whenever we go live, as long as you keep that bell rung. And you can always find us on YouTube if you want to rewatch any of the episodes. You can just head over to the episodes tab to see those. Max, any parting words for the chat as before we wrap this up?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm gonna do one more plug.
Yes.
If you don't have the rubber ducky yet, go get the goddamn rubber ducky. What are you doing being in Jason's chat and you don't have the rubber ducky? It is perfect. When the website works, go to get the goddamn rubber ducky. It is amazing. I have it on my desk all day, every day. It is the best rubber duck I've ever had. It is also the only rubber duck I've ever had, because it is the only one that was good enough to sit on my desk all day. Jason, thank you so much for having me.
This little duck is going to listen to me weep as I try to debug why my site is broken for no reason. Max, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate having you on the show. Chat, as always, thanks for hanging out. We're going to go find somebody to raid. I think that's it for this episode. So thank you all very much. We will see you next time.